And then it finally came to a point when they were like this went on for weeks. And then he was like getting weirder and weirder and more cold. And he finally said he wasn't going to come with me. And they were trying to force me into the confessional. I would just stay in my room all day. So then when we got back to the base, it was just like, it was almost like I'd been living with some degree of freedom for almost a year now. And it was like a shit show. And everyone was psychotic there. And it was just so obvious that they were doing everything they could to make everyone there miserable. And they did not give a crap about their happiness or their well-being. And I like it was just something that I knew for a fact. Like it was something that was undeniable. Mm-hmm. And yeah. And then so shortly thereafter I wanted to leave.
Now, how did that go down? And was your husband on board right away, or was that a tough conversation?
So he was on board right away. But so if you want to leave the Sea organization, you're not actually allowed to tell your spouse. It's considered a suppressive act for which you could be declared. But I did tell him, but he was sort of like, yeah. But he was like, but you get through your stuff. And then once you get through it, like, because before you leave, you have to do a whole interrogation and sign all this crap. And he was like, once you get through all that, then I'll leave. If you get through it, I'll leave with you. And so I was like, okay. So.
Now, that's just leaving the Sea Org. That's not leaving Scientology.
Right. Yeah.
But it's a big deal because of who you are, obviously. Bigger deal.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And they did a few last ditch efforts to like try to give me a post that I would like. And so like
what?
So actually at that time is when I did my auditor training. And the reason I chose to do my auditor training is because at the crux of whether or not Scientology works is auditing. So I felt like it was the only job that I could do that wasn't like, hadn't been twisted by that was only written by L. Ron Hubbard, and that was the way I could see if Scientology really helped people or not. Mm-hmm. It's like Scientology in its purest form. Like all the other jobs were like managing this person, managing this person who manages this person who manages. It was like all like so much red tape and ridiculousness, where I felt like if this didn't work, then it would be undeniable. And so I did my auditor training, and there's just more of the same stuff going on. Like I wound up auditing some people, like there became new rules. Like people in higher level organizations couldn't be married to people in lower level organizations. And so like I wound up auditing, and I only audited for a month, but I wound up auditing somebody who was not allowed to talk to their wife because of these rules, and was trying to get through this auditing action in order to be able to talk to his wife he was so in love with. And it just became one thing after another. Like everyone was just getting treated like crap. And it didn't work. Like I didn't wind up being able to teach myself that Scientology actually works or helps people. It was the opposite.
That was the last ditch effort, and it just fell flat.
Yeah. And I was getting confessionals myself, and I wound up like meaning interrogations. And I wound up getting so pissed off in one that I left the room, and I had to like fight the auditor, and I had to like run down the stairs before they could catch me. And it was just like, and I got in trouble for this, and it was just more out PR. So then they were like, so finally it was time to leave.
I'm sorry, when you say fight, like physically get into
physically
it?
fight.
Is it a guy?
It was a woman. But so in Scientology, when you're training to become an auditor, you actually do a course that is all about how to physically force the person to do what you tell them to do. It's called like upper indoctrination training routines. And it's like, in one of the drills that you do is they try everything they can to get away. Like everything they can. It's like a whole scene in the classroom when it's happening. Everyone's watching. And you have to be able to, and usually like when I did, I was twin with this huge guy who's like 6 foot something. And they have to do everything they can to get away. And you learn to basically force them. And so when you're in an auditing session in Scientology, your auditor is trained to not let you leave the room. And you're not allowed to leave the room, and you know that. And so, and there's a camera, and on some level you don't ever try it because you know the rules. But I just was like so fed up. I mean, I had so many more hours of confessionals than anybody else I ever knew. I was just so over everything. I was like, honestly, I think I was just like having a mental break at this time. And I was like, I did not care about the rules anymore. I just like wanted to get the fuck out of there. And like, so I crushed the cans to the e-meter that you hold, because I was like, if I crush them, then she can't do the session. Like, she can't use the e-meter. And she still wouldn't let me leave. I threw my auditing folder up in the air. She still wouldn't let me leave. And we were just like fighting. And I wound up like being able to push her out of the way. I mean, this auditing room was like more of like an eighth the size of this room. It was tiny.
Whoa.
Like, and then I finally got out, and then I was like running to the back stairwell so that I could escape the building. And there was somebody like who, like, just as I pushed open the door on that led to outside, a security guard was just getting there and didn't stop me in time. And I like wound up like screaming like, leave me alone, get the fuck away from me. And they're like they just like knew at that point it was bad PR and someone could call the cops. But then it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm walking around here on the sidewalk now with nowhere to go. Like, who am I going to call? So I always just wound up having to go back.
So you go back into the building after that?
Oh, like, where else would I go? I didn't
like
have
everything
a phone.
Normal. Yeah.
Well, I guess I would walk around all day until I like calmed down. And often there would be someone following me, trying to get me to come back. And I didn't have anyone to call, really. I didn't.
Like a teacher-like person, like, hey, come back, that kind of thing?
So at first it would be like an auditor, but then they would enlist my friends to be like, Jenna, please come back. This is good. And I'd be like, hey, stay out of it. They're using you, and I don't want to get angry at you because you have nothing to do with this. So just like, so it just, that went on for a little while. And then finally I was like, okay, I'm leaving. And they wanted me to get an interrogation. And I was like, and in order to get an interrogation, I had to do this other auditing thing. And I refused to do it. I was like, I'm never getting auditing again. I want the fuck out of here. But
who'd you go and tell this to?
It was the people in the Office of Special Affairs and also the RTC representative. Anyways, she was like the most important person on the base. And
was that Mike Rinder's office?
Yes. Yeah. In fact, Mike Rinder handled my routing out directly and was directly involved. I did not know this at the time, but basically when I was like supposed to be getting my interrogation, they were taking my ex-husband aside separately, and he stopped like coming back to the room at night, and I was like, you're still leaving with me, right? And he was like, yeah, well, only if you get through your confessional. But I just like couldn't bring myself to do it, and I was like, and then he sort of like started changing his tune slowly, and I was like, well, who are you talking to? He was like, no one. And then it finally came to a point when they were like this went on for weeks, and then he was like getting weirder and weirder and more cold, and he finally said he wasn't going to come with me. And they were trying to force me into the confessional. I would just stay in my room all day. And then they tried to get me to sign this form that was like, if I ever speak badly about Scientology, then I will pay however many millions of dollars. And I was like, I just like shredded it in her face. I was like, I'm never signing this.
Good for you.
And it was because I was also pissed off at that time that Dallas was starting to act weird, and I knew that they were doing something with him.
They're getting to him.
Yeah. And then so finally I was like, okay, well, I can't do this anymore. I'm going to leave without you. I was going to go to my parents' house. And at this time I did have my cell phone and I could talk to them. And they like couldn't, like when they said they were going to take it away from me, I said I was going to call the police. And so,
he's threatened to call the cops.
Yeah. I mean, it was all like, I was already in trouble. Like I was already doing the worst things I could do. I don't think that I really believed in Scientology anymore.
Yeah.
Like, so, and most people, they're leaving just the Sea Org. I would think I was like done with all of it. So like Aaron left the year after me. He left the Sea Org just the year after me. We left the Sea Org at the same time. But he continued
Stayed in
with Scientology. Yeah.
Right.
And so
But you want to break free completely. You're like, I'm done.
yeah, but it was easier for me because my parents were already out of Scientology.
Yes.
And so so I wound up being like, okay, all right, I'm going to leave without Dallas. And I was really upset. And I remember I was going to leave the next day and I was crying and we were like hugging and like he gave me one of his sweaters. And then he was like, okay, I'm going to take you to the airport. And then from OSA, the gal was like, no, you can't take her to the airport. You drop her in a cab and say goodbye and that's it. And then,
my God.
Yeah. And then, so to his credit, he was like, well, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. She's my wife. I'm not going to ever see her again. And she was like, absolutely not. And like started acting crazy. And then he was like, no, I'm going to take her to the airport. And then so she wound up like, so he had a car and he like was taking me to the airport. She was like, fine, I'm going to be in the car with you guys. So she was like in the back seat. Yeah. Then we like went to get something to eat. She was there the entire time. He was like dropping me off and saying goodbye. And I was like, and at that time I remembered something like as I was leaving in the airport, like about to get on my flight, I remembered something that someone had said to me, a very senior executive. He's like the third in command of Scientology. He was basically like, you know, like he was like, all we care about is how you're doing. Like Dallas can be thrown to the sharks. And I was like, if I leave, they're basically like, they're going to destroy him. Like he's just going to be in trouble. The only reason he hasn't been RPF'd or anything like that is because they know that I wouldn't let that happen. Yep. And so I basically wound up telling him, I said like, look, I'll stay and I will complete my program and I'll just stay. If you want to stay, then I'll stay with you. And then like it was kind of a tactic at the time because I was like, I knew that all they could say about me was that I wanted to leave. And he kept turning it on me that I was leaving him. And so I was like, fine, I'll stay. Mm-hmm. And then he was like, started crying and basically told me everything that had been happening, that Mike Rinder and this gal from OSA had been interrogating him every single day. And they had been telling him how bad my family was. They have been making him tell everything that I ever said to him, all the things that my parents told me, like about Dave beating people and stuff that was going on at the Imp base. And he basically said like, and if I left with you, they said that I would never speak to my family again. And then so then we like were told, the girl who was there, I was like, okay, we're going to stay. And she was like, no, thank you.
Well, was she listening? Was she hearing this?
So she was there.
She's hearing the whole conversation.
Well, no, so she was there and I was like, leave us alone. And then she was like, no, I'm staying right here. And in the airport, I was like, leave me and my husband the fuck alone. Get away. So this is out PR.
Yeah.
She goes away. Like, so if the second I started creating a scene, she would take a step away. And so we were able to have this conversation. So but she was calling Dallas the whole time. And I even I took his phone and I broke it in half and threw it in the trash and then, so like.
Don't fuck up, Aaron. She got the biggest balls in this room. Just saying.
That was a long time ago. And so, she was like, I was like, he was like, we want to stay. And she was like, no, thank you. It's like, they were like, so we went back and they were like, no, she can't stay.
She's got to go.
Yes.
We've already decided.
And they tried to separate us again. And he was like, no, I'm not being separated again. This has already happened.
I mean, the emotional turmoil of this is just absurd. I mean, it's unfathomable.
Exactly. Yes. Yeah. It's crazy. Like.
Yes.
Yeah. So they tried to separate us again and they tried.
Like physically, security comes
yes.
in?
Yeah. And I was like, no, you can't separate us. And security was involved. Like we were in the security office when this was happening. And then we wound up like staying at the Travelodge for the night because they wouldn't let us go back into our room and get our stuff to leave. And then when we woke up in the morning from the Travelodge, which we had to like get money from my parents to be able to even have money to stay there because
So
we
you get
didn't have
into
any money.
contact with them and tell them what's going on.
Yes, yeah.
Okay.
And my dad did say at the time, he said, if they don't let you leave, I'll come there and get you. And then, so when we woke up in the morning from the travel lodge and we're like, how are we going to sort this out? Like, there was a whole, like, basically they were already there. The chief of security of the LA base was there with a U-Haul full of all of our stuff that was like in these meticulously packed boxes with an inventory of which box every single thing was in, like down to like Q-tips and like condoms. It
Oh
was
my
like,
God.
it was like so weird. And he was like, basically like gave us the U-Haul and was like, said, Dallas, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure you never, ever speak to your family again. And then basically like left after he like told me that I was a piece of crap. And I was like, yeah, go fuck yourself.
God, these people are so deep.
Yeah. So then, and then we went down to San Diego to his parents' house. But then when we looked at like, basically it was paid for us to drive all the way to Virginia where my parents lived. And I didn't even realize that that's where they expected us to go once Dallas was leaving.
Oh, your parents are in Virginia now, not Mexico.
Right, yeah.
Okay.
Sorry, at some point in the middle they had moved to Mexico.
Quite a change.
Yeah, sorry. Minor detail. Anyways, so they had expected us to go to Virginia and not to San Diego. And so because Dallas's family were active Scientologists, and so us being in contact with them like made it so they couldn't do Scientology, and they didn't want us to like poison the field for them. And so, yeah. So we drove down to San Diego that night, and his mom was really happy to see us, and his dad was kind of like, oh shit, like we're in trouble. Yeah.
But if you guys went down there, his parents, the whole threat was that if he leaves, he's going to be disconnected from them. So had they been warned by like Mike Rinder's office or something that you guys were leaving and might be coming and they're supposed to turn you away?
Well, they hadn't been warned because they apparently thought that we were going to Virginia where my parents were. So I think that Mike Rinder and them didn't realize that we would be going to San Diego.
But don't they have to think there's a possibility that you might say, fuck it, we're going to make a break for it? Like, they don't have control over you.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I think that they did think that. And I think that Dallas's dad like kind of immediately kind of reported it in and was like, what am I supposed to do? And I think they reached out to him as well, because when we returned the U-Haul, they probably saw where it was because they had paid for it, and they realized that we were there. And, you know, I didn't know it at the time, but like recently these documents that Mike Rinder had from that time, like that have kind of like recently been made known publicly, they kind of document all the things that they were doing, all the behind the scenes things that they were talking with Dallas about, that they were like having people like scout Dallas's parents' house, and they were like, you know, their car is there, and like, but we'll wait till they leave before we go in and talk to Dallas's parents, and just all this stuff. But yeah, I mean, I guess something that should have been like really like climactic, like, oh, we finally left, it's a relief, you know, we're not there anymore, kind of just, and while it kind of was like that, it was just straight to we were living with Dallas's parents at the time, just like being harassed every night.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.